The piano key pressed down once more. No human finger touched its ivory surface. The composer's study had been silent for 3 years, ever since Maestro Benedetti had completed his final symphony and departed for the conservatory in Vienna. But within the mahogany-paneled walls of this creative sanctuary, music continued to exist in forms that transcended human performance. Sheet music lays scattered across the grand piano's music stand, notes frozen mid-composition, like thoughts crystallized in ink, while the late afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows to illuminate the manuscript pages where melodies waited in patient silence. The Steinway grand piano dominated the center of the room, its ebony surface reflecting the golden light that danced across its closed lid. Beneath that lid, 88 keys rested in perfect formation, each one a doorway to musical possibility. The keys understood their purpose with mechanical precision. Each press would trigger a felt hammer to strike steel strings, creating vibrations that would travel through soundboard and air to become the raw material of musical expression. But these keys had felt the touch of genius, and they remembered every melody that had ever been born beneath the composer's fingers. The piano strings stretched in parallel lines beneath the instrument's curved case, each string calibrated to exact tension that would produce its designated pitch when struck. Bass strings, thick and copper-wound, hummed with the memory of profound low notes that had anchored symphonic movements, while the treble strings, thin and bright, still resonated with the echoes of delicate melodies that had danced above orchestral arrangements like sunlight on water. Each string maintained its pitch through the mechanical tension of the piano's iron frame, but they also held something more, the acoustic memory of every composition that had emerged from this study. The strings had vibrated with Benedetti's nocturnes, his sonatas, his concertos, and they continued to exist in a state of musical readiness, prepared to sing again if fingers should ever return to the keys. The metronome on the piano's music rack stood frozen at 120 beats per minute, its pendulum caught mid-swing in mechanical suspension. This device had been the timekeeper for countless composition sessions, its steady tick-tock providing the rhythmic foundation against which Benedetti had built his musical architectures. The metronome understood rhythm in its purest form, not as emotion or expression, but as mathematical division of time into precise, measurable units. Now imagine sitting in that leather chair beside the piano, surrounded by the tools of musical creation, where silence itself seems to pulse with the potential for melody. Sheet music covered every available surface in the study, compositions in various stages of completion, from rough sketches with hurried notations to finished scores ready for orchestral performance. Each page represented a moment of creative inspiration captured in the symbolic language of musical notation, where abstract ideas about rhythm, pitch, and harmony had been translated into visual symbols that could be read and performed by musicians across the world. The manuscript paper itself held a special reverence for the musical process. These cream-colored sheets marked with 5-line staffs had served as the birthplace for melodies that would outlive their creator. The paper understood that it was more than mere cellulose. It was the canvas upon which temporal art became permanent, where fleeting musical thoughts were preserved for future generations to discover and perform. Ink bottles lined the desk's wooden surface, their dark contents having flowed through fountain pens to become the physical manifestation of musical ideas. The ink had dried into note heads, stems, and accidents, but it retained the memory of flowing from pen to paper at the exact moment when inspiration had struck. Each drop of ink represented a decision about pitch, duration, or harmonic progression that would affect how the music would be performed. Listen to the silence between the notes, where music exists in its purest potential, waiting for the breath of performance to bring it to life. The violin resting in its case beside the piano had been Benedetti's primary tool for testing melodic lines and exploring the expressive capabilities of string instruments. The violin's wooden body had been carved from aged maple and spruce, its acoustic properties carefully shaped by craftsmen who understood that instrument making was both science and art. The violin's strings, G, D, A, and E, were tuned to precise mathematical ratios that created harmonic relationships fundamental to Western music. The violin's bridge transmitted vibrations from the strings to the instrument's soundboard, amplifying and coloring the raw string vibrations to create the complex tonal qualities that made the violin capable of expressing human emotion through pure acoustic physics. The instrument had sung Benedetti's experimental melodies, helping him hear how his compositions would sound when performed by the orchestral violin sections he wrote for. Music stands throughout the study held various compositions at different stages of development. Some displayed complete orchestral scores with parts for dozens of instruments, while others held simple piano reductions or melodic sketches that served as starting points for larger works. Each stand represented a different project, a different musical exploration, a different attempt to capture some aspect of human experience in organized sound. The music stands hold frozen symphonies, compositions that exist in perfect potential, waiting for orchestras that may never perform them, but which live eternally in their written form. The acoustic properties of the study itself had been carefully designed to enhance the composer's work environment. High ceilings allowed sound to develop fully before reaching the listener's ear, while hardwood floors in strategic wall angles created reverberation that helped Benedetti hear how his compositions would sound in concert halls. The room had become an extension of his musical instrument, its architectural acoustics serving as a preview of how his works would sound when performed in larger venues. Bookshelves lined one wall of the study, filled with scores by master composers whose works had influenced Benedetti's musical education and creative development. Bach's well-tempered clavier sat beside Beethoven's symphonies, while Mozart's piano sonatas shared self-space with Chopin's nocturnes. These bound volumes represented centuries of musical evolution, each composer building upon the innovations of their predecessors to expand the possibilities of musical expression. The leather-bound harmony textbooks contained the theoretical foundations that supported all Western musical composition. Explanations of chord progressions, voice leading, and formal structures that provided the grammatical rules for the language of music. These theories had been internalized by Benedetti until they became instinctual, allowing him to compose with the same fluency that poets use language or painters use color. Music theory books hold the grammar of an eternal language, rules that govern how sounds can be organized to create meaning and emotion in the minds of listeners. A small recording device sat on the desk, its microphone ready to capture musical ideas that might emerge spontaneously during composition sessions. This device had recorded countless fragments, melodic phrases hummed around the room, rhythmic patterns tapped on the desk's wooden surface, harmonic progressions played softly on the piano during late-night composition sessions when full volume would disturb the household. The recorded fragments existed as digital audio files, preserved versions of musical thoughts that had occurred too quickly to be immediately notated. These recordings served as an external memory bank for the composer's creative process, allowing ideas to be captured in their raw form and later refined into polished compositions. Window light played across the study throughout the day, creating constantly changing illumination that had influenced the mood of composition sessions. Morning light had inspired bright, energetic passages, while the golden light of late afternoon had encouraged more contemplative musical explorations. Evening shadows had provided the atmospheric backdrop for mysterious or dramatic musical ideas that found their way into nocturnes and darker orchestral movements. Light itself becomes part of the creative process, its daily cycle influencing the emotional content of compositions that capture not just musical ideas, but the atmospheric conditions under which they were conceived. The piano bench held sheet music in its storage compartment, exercises, etudes, and technical studies that had maintained Benedetti's performing skills and inspired compositional techniques. These practice pieces represented the mechanical foundation that supported creative expression, the technical discipline that allowed musical imagination to be realized through physical performance. Pencils and erasers scattered across the desk's surface showed evidence of the revision process that characterized serious composition. Musical ideas rarely emerged in perfect form. They required refinement, adjustment, and sometimes complete reconceptualization before achieving their final written form. The eraser marks on manuscript pages told stories of creative decisions, of musical roads not taken, of the iterative process through which inspiration became art. The study's Persian rugs absorbed sound reflections, creating acoustic dead zones where Benedetti could work without excessive reverberation while still maintaining enough acoustic liveliness to hear his compositions clearly. These rugs had witnessed countless composition sessions, absorbing not just sound waves, but the creative energy that had filled the room during periods of intense musical productivity. Persian patterns beneath the piano hold memories of countless footsteps pacing while searching for the next phrase, the next harmonic resolution, the next musical idea that would complete a composition. A small collection of tuning forks rested in a wooden box, each fork calibrated to produce specific pitches with mechanical precision. These tools had provided reference tones when tuning instruments or checking the accuracy of written pitches, serving as acoustic anchors that connected Benedetti's compositions to the mathematical foundations of musical pitch relationships. The grandfather clock in the corner had marked time during composition sessions with its pendulum swing and hourly chimes, providing rhythmic inspiration and temporal structure for musical works. The clock's mechanism operated on the same principles as the metronome, the precise division of time into measurable units, but at a larger scale that helped organize composition sessions and mark progress on long-term projects. Composition notebooks filled with musical sketches showed the development of ideas from initial concepts to finished works. These notebooks served as laboratories for musical experimentation, spaces where Benedetti could try different approaches to melodic development, harmonic progression, and formal structure without committing to final decisions. Notebook pages hold the DNA of symphonies, the genetic material from which full orchestral works evolved through creative processes that transformed simple ideas into complex musical architectures. The fireplace had provided warmth during winter composition sessions, its crackling flames creating acoustic texture that sometimes influenced the rhythmic characteristics of pieces written during cold months. The fire's irregular rhythms had inspired passages where musical meter deviated from strict mathematical precision to create more organic, breath-like musical phrasing. Candelabras and oil lamps had illuminated evening composition sessions before electric lighting, their flickering flames creating atmospheric conditions that influenced the mood and character of nocturnes and other evening-inspired musical works. The quality of light had affected not just visual perception, but emotional state, which in turn influenced the expressive content of compositions created under different illumination conditions. The study's wooden floors resonated with footstep rhythms as Benedetti had paced while working through compositional problems, the percussion of his walking sometimes providing rhythmic inspiration for musical passages. The floor had become a percussion instrument in its own right, its acoustic responses to movement contributing to the overall sonic environment in which compositions were created. Floorboards remember the rhythm of creative pacing, the footstep patterns that accompanied musical problem solving, the physical movement that helped generate mental movement through compositional challenges. A collection of different pens and pencils offered varying line qualities for musical notation, some producing bold, confident strokes for final drafts, others providing fine lines suitable for detailed revisions and annotations. The choice of writing instrument had influenced not just the visual appearance of manuscripts, but the psychological approach to composition, with different tools encouraging different types of musical thinking. Blank manuscript paper weighted in neat stacks, its empty staves representing unlimited musical possibility. Each blank page held the potential for symphonies, sonatas, songs, or chamber works, musical forms that existed in pure possibility until the act of notation brought them into written existence. The piano's pedals, sustain, sostenuto, and una corda, had provided expressive control over the instrument's sound, allowing Benedetti to explore different acoustic textures while composing. The sustain pedal had connected otherwise separate notes into flowing melodic lines, while the soft pedal had created intimate dynamics suitable for delicate musical passages. Piano pedals control the flow of musical time, connecting discrete key presses into continuous melodic lines, transforming mechanical action into expressive performance. Small objects throughout the study served as sources of rhythmic inspiration: a pocket watch whose ticking provided metric reference, a small bell whose tone suggested melodic intervals, a wooden box whose percussive possibilities had influenced orchestral writing. These everyday objects had become part of the composer's acoustic environment, their sounds contributing to the sonic palette from which musical ideas emerged. The study window's view of the garden had provided visual inspiration that translated into musical imagery, flowing melodic lines that mimicked the movement of tree branches and wind, rhythmic patterns suggested by rain on leaves, harmonic progressions that captured the color relationships in flower arrangements. Nature's patterns had provided structural models for musical compositions that sought to capture organic growth processes in organized sound. Music publishers' correspondence lay organized in desk drawers, letters discussing publication details, performance rights, and premiere arrangements for Benedetti's completed works. These documents represented the practical aspects of composition, the business relationships that allowed musical works to reach audiences beyond the study where they were created. Publisher letters transform private musical creation into public cultural experience, providing pathways through which musical compositions travel from creator to performers to audiences across geographical and temporal boundaries. All the objects in the composer's study existed in a state of creative readiness, their purpose fulfilled not through active use, but through their availability for musical creation. They had participated in a process that transformed silence into symphony, emptiness into expression, mathematical relationships into emotional communication. Each item in the room had contributed to compositions that would outlive their creator and continue speaking to audiences generations into the future. The study breathed with creative potential, its atmosphere charged with the accumulated energy of countless composition sessions. Every surface, every tool, every manuscript page had been touched by the creative process that mysteriously transformed abstract musical ideas into concrete notational symbols that could be read, performed, and experienced by others. In the depths of the composer's study, music exists in its purest form, not as sound, but as idea, not as performance, but as potential, not as temporal experience, but as eternal possibility waiting for resurrection through performance. The silence of the study was not empty, but full, filled with melodies that had been written, harmonies that had been explored, rhythms that had been discovered. Every composition that had emerged from this room continued to exist within its walls, not as acoustic vibration, but as creative memory, as artistic DNA that influenced every subsequent musical thought. And you, experiencing this musical sanctuary through the perspective of musical objects themselves, can rest in the knowledge that creativity persists beyond its creator, that musical ideas possess a form of immortality that transcends individual human existence. The tools of composition continue to hold the memory of every melody they helped create. Sleep now, surrounded by the eternal presence of music that exists not in sound, but in potential, compositions that live forever in the written notes that capture inspiration, in symbols that transcend time. The composer's study maintains its creative vigil as consciousness fades, the gentle presence of musical possibility guiding you into peaceful sleep. In the morning, melodies may awaken in your mind, inspired by the creative atmosphere that surrounds musical creation, carried safely through the night by the eternal presence of composition that continues creating even in silence. where every note ever written continues to exist in perfect potential, waiting for the touch of performance to bring written music back to acoustic life, continues creating even in silence. But within this sanctuary of musical creation, the deepest mysteries of composition revealed themselves through the relationships between objects that had witnessed genius at work. The relationship between piano and manuscript paper had evolved into something approaching musical telepathy. The piano knew which keys would be pressed for specific harmonic progressions before the notes appeared on paper, while the manuscript pages anticipated melodic lines that would emerge from the keyboard's ivory and ebony landscape. This symbiotic relationship had developed through thousands of hours of composition, creating an artistic ecosystem where inspiration flowed seamlessly between instrument and notation. The fountain pen that rested beside unfinished scores had absorbed the creative energy of countless composition sessions, its gold nib shaped by the pressure of Benedetti's grip during moments of intense musical concentration. The pen had learned to flow more smoothly during passages of melodic beauty and to hesitate slightly during complex harmonic transitions, as if the instrument itself participated in the aesthetic decisions that determined musical quality. Musical sketches in various stages of completion covered the study's surfaces like archaeological layers of creativity. Early sketches showed raw musical ideas in their most primitive form, single melodic lines with minimal harmonic support. Intermediate drafts revealed the development of these ideas into more sophisticated structures, with counter melodies, harmonic progressions, and rhythmic variations that transform simple themes into complex musical arguments. Each layer of musical revision tells the story of creative evolution, showing how inspiration develops from spark to flame to symphonic conflagration through the patient work of artistic refinement. The violin strings had developed their own relationship with the compositions created in this study. The G string, lowest and most mellow, had sung the bass lines and foundational melodies that anchored Benedetti's chamber works. The E string, highest and most brilliant, had tested the soaring melodic lines that would challenge orchestral violinists in concert performances. Each string maintained muscle memory of every passage it had played during the compositional process. Window light streaming across manuscript pages had created a natural metronome of shadow and illumination as the sun moved across the sky during a long composition sessions. Morning light had inspired bright major key passages, while afternoon shadows had encouraged exploration of minor modalities and more introspective musical territories. Evening twilight had provided the perfect atmospheric backdrop for nocturnes and other contemplative musical forms. The study's acoustics had been shaped by furniture placement that created specific sonic characteristics for different areas of the room. The corner where the piano stood provided the most resonant acoustic environment, suitable for hearing how compositions would sound in concert halls. The desk area offered more muted acoustics, perfect for quiet composition work that required concentration without acoustic distraction. Acoustic zones within the study served different aspects of the creative process, each area optimized for specific types of musical thinking and compositional activity. Sheet music publishers' catalogs lay open on side tables, their pages showing the musical works that had influenced Benedetti's compositional development. Bach's inventions had provided models for counterpoint, while Chopin's etudes had demonstrated how technical challenges could be transformed into musical poetry. Beethoven's symphonies had shown how simple motifs could be developed into massive musical architectures that sustained listener interest across movements lasting nearly an hour. The metronomes pendulum, frozen at 120 beats per minute, had last been set during work on a scherzo movement that required precise rhythmic coordination between multiple instrumental voices. That tempo marking had become permanently associated with musical joy and playfulness in Benedetti's compositional vocabulary, while slower metronome settings had been reserved for more serious musical expressions. Candlesticks on the mantelpiece had provided illumination for late-night composition sessions when electric lighting would have been too harsh for the delicate work of musical creation. Candlelight had created an atmospheric environment that encouraged musical introspection and emotional depth, contributing to compositions that explored the quieter regions of human experience. Candlelight composition created musical works with different emotional characteristics than those written under electric illumination, the quality of light influencing the quality of musical expression. The Persian rug beneath the piano showed wear patterns that revealed Benedetti's movement habits during composition. Heavy wear near the piano bench marked the primary composition station, while lighter wear patterns showed paths walked during creative problem solving. The rug had absorbed not just footsteps, but the acoustic energy of every musical idea that had been tested on the keyboard above. Musical instruments beyond the violin and piano had contributed to the study's creative environment. A small wooden flute rested in a case, its simple mechanism having provided melodic inspiration for orchestral woodwind parts. A set of pitch pipes offered the reference tones for tuning and interval checking. These secondary instruments had served as compositional tools rather than performance instruments, helping Benedetti understand how his written music would sound when played by orchestral musicians. The grandfather clock's chiming mechanism had provided unexpected rhythmic inspiration during composition sessions. The clock's quarterly chimes had suggested rhythmic patterns that found their way into musical compositions, while the hour strikes had marked the passage of time during extended creative work. The clock had become an unintentional collaborator in the compositional process, contributing temporal structure to musical thinking. Household timekeeping devices became compositional partners, their mechanical rhythms providing unconscious inspiration for musical meter and rhythmic variety. Correspondence from performers lay organized in desk drawers, letters from violinists, pianists, and conductors who had premiered Benedetti's works in concert halls across Europe. These letters contained practical suggestions about performance techniques, feedback about audience reactions, and requests for modifications that would make certain passages more playable for specific instruments. The relationship between composer and performer had influenced compositional decisions throughout Benedetti's career. Technical limitations of specific instruments had challenged him to find creative solutions that made musical ideas realizable through human performance. The physical constraints of fingering, bowing, and breathing had shaped melodic lines and harmonic progressions in ways that made compositions both playable and musically satisfying. Musical form charts and analytical diagrams covered one wall of the study, showing the structural relationships that governed symphonies, sonatas, and chamber works. These visual representations of musical architecture had helped Benedetti understand how large-scale compositions could maintain coherence across movements while providing sufficient variety to sustain listener interest throughout extended performance times. Architectural diagrams of musical form reveal the hidden structural relationships that allow musical works to achieve artistic unity while maintaining sufficient variety to engage audiences across extended temporal experiences. The study's collection of manuscript papers included different sizes and styles for various types of composition. Large orchestral scores required paper with enough staff lines to accommodate dozens of instrumental parts, while piano compositions used simpler formats with only 2 or 3 staffs per system. The choice of manuscript paper had influenced compositional thinking by determining how much musical information could be seen simultaneously on each page. Ink bottles contained different colors that had been used for different aspects of compositional notation. Black ink marked primary musical material, while red ink indicated revisions and corrections. Blue ink had been reserved for performance markings and expressive indications. The color coding system had helped Benedetti track the evolution of compositions through multiple revision cycles. Sound dampening materials in the study's construction had been chosen to provide acoustic isolation during composition sessions while maintaining enough reverberation to hear musical ideas clearly. Heavy curtains absorbed excessive reflection, while wooden surfaces provided the acoustic liveliness necessary for musical perception. The acoustic design had created an environment optimized for creative work rather than performance. Architectural acoustics specifically designed for composition create different sonic environments than those optimized for performance, supporting creative thinking rather than audience experience. The study's heating system had been designed to maintain consistent temperature and humidity levels that would protect musical instruments and manuscript paper from environmental damage. Stable atmospheric conditions had ensured that piano tuning remained stable during long composition sessions, and that paper would not expand or contract in ways that might affect the precision of musical notation. Reference books on orchestration lined shelves near the composition desk, their pages marked with annotations about instrumental ranges, timbral characteristics, and combination possibilities. These technical manuals had provided the practical knowledge necessary for translating musical ideas into performable orchestral parts that would achieve desired sonic effects when played by professional musicians. The creative process had generated not just finished compositions, but also fragments, sketches, and experimental passages that had contributed to Benedetti's artistic development, even though they never became part of completed works. These musical orphans existed in folders and notebooks throughout the study, representing roads not taken in the compositional journey, but valuable for understanding the full scope of creative exploration. Musical fragments and abandoned compositions serve as archaeological evidence of the creative process, revealing the paths of artistic exploration that led to successful musical works. All these elements of the composer's study continue to exist in a state of creative potential. Their purpose fulfills not through active use, but through their availability for creative artistic creation. They had participated in the mysterious process through which abstract musical ideas became concrete artistic works that could communicate emotional experiences across cultural and temporal boundaries. The study breathed with accumulated creative energy, its atmosphere permanently charged by the thousands of hours of compositional work that had taken place within its walls. Every object, every surface, every acoustic reflection had been touched by the creative process that transformed silence into symphony through the application of artistic skill to musical inspiration. In the eternal silence of the composer's study, music exists in its most pure form, not as acoustic vibration, but as artistic possibility, not as temporal performance, but as permanent potential waiting for resurrection through the interpretive artistry of performers yet to come. The tools of composition maintained their readiness for creative work that might never resume, but their artistic purpose had been fulfilled through participation in the creation of musical works that would outlive both creator and instruments. They had achieved the highest purpose of artistic tools, contributing to creations that transcend their material origins to become permanent additions to human cultural experience. And you, surrounded by these witnesses to musical creation, can rest in the knowledge that artistic inspiration continues to emanate from spaces where genius has worked, that creative environments retain the energy of artistic achievement long after their creators have departed. The composer's study serves as proof that human creativity can transform ordinary objects into sacred tools of artistic expression. Sleep now, embraced by the eternal presence of musical creativity that flows through this study like an invisible river of artistic potential, carrying you into dreams where melodies wait to be discovered and harmonies hover at the edge of consciousness. The composer's study maintains its artistic vigil as your consciousness fades into peaceful sleep. In the morning, you may awaken with melodies in your mind, inspired by the creative atmosphere that surrounds all spaces where art has been born. The study's creative energy will carry you safely through the night toward whatever musical discoveries await in your own artistic journey. Sweet dreams cradled in the sanctuary where music transitions from imagination to notation, where creative inspiration becomes permanent artistic achievement, where silence and sound meet in the eternal dance of composition that continues even when no human hands touch the keys that remember every melody they have ever played. But the deepest secrets of the composer's study lay not in its visible instruments and manuscripts, but in the invisible network of creative relationships that connected every object to every musical idea that had ever been born within these walls. The piano's hammers, hidden beneath the instrument's case, had struck strings millions of times during Benedetti's compositional career. Each hammer bore microscopic impressions from the felt that had contacted steel, creating unique tonal characteristics that influenced the sound of every composition tested on this particular instrument. The piano had become not just a tool, but a collaborator, its specific acoustic personality shaping musical ideas in ways that would not have occurred with any other instrument. The study's floorboards had absorbed vibrations from every note ever played, their wood fibers storing acoustic memory in molecular structures that continued to resonate with phantom frequencies of past performances. Walking across these floors during creative sessions, Benedetti had unknowingly activated harmonic sympathies with previous compositions, creating subliminal acoustic connections between new works and existing musical ideas. Manuscript paper manufacturing had involved cotton fibers and chemical processes that created unique surface textures affecting how ink flowed during notation. Different batches of paper had subtle variations in absorbency and texture that influenced the character of handwritten music, creating visual aesthetics that complemented the musical content they preserved. The paper had become a silent partner in composition, its physical properties contributing to the artistic process in ways too subtle for conscious recognition. Every material component of the creative environment participated in musical creation through physical properties that influenced artistic decisions, making the study itself a complex musical instrument designed for composition rather than performance. The violin's wooden body had been carved from trees that grew in European forests over periods spanning decades or centuries, their cellular structures shaped by seasons, weather patterns, and soil conditions that ultimately influenced the acoustic properties of the finished instrument. The violin carried not just musical potential, but historical memory, its tonal characteristics connecting Benedetti's compositions to the natural forces that had shaped the wood from which his testing instrument had been crafted. Atmospheric pressure variations throughout the seasons had affected the tuning and response characteristics of instruments in the study, creating subtle influences on compositional work that correlated with weather patterns and seasonal changes. Spring compositions had emerged during periods of rising barometric pressure, while autumn works had been influenced by atmospheric conditions that created different harmonic overtone relationships in the study's acoustic environment. The study's windows have been positioned to capture specific qualities of natural light at different times of day, but they also served as acoustic interfaces with the external environment. Birdsong had provided melodic inspiration for pastoral passages, while rain patterns had suggested rhythmic structures for more dynamic musical sections. The windows had functioned as portals through which natural sounds entered the compositional process. Natural acoustic environments beyond the study walls had contributed unconsciously to musical creation, with outdoor sounds providing rhythmic and melodic inspiration that found its way into compositions through subliminal creative processes. Temperature fluctuations had affected the molecular behavior of piano strings, creating minute changes in pitch relationships that influenced harmonic choices during composition. Warm days had encouraged major key exploration, while cooler temperatures had subtly shifted string tensions in ways that made minor key harmonies more acoustically appealing. The composer's harmonic preferences had been shaped by physical environmental factors operating below the threshold of conscious awareness. The study's collection of musical scores had been arranged according to Benedetti's personal organization system that reflected his understanding of stylistic relationships between different composers and historical periods. Bach had been positioned near Brahms to reflect their shared interest in conjunctival techniques, while Chopin had been placed adjacent to Debussy to acknowledge their common exploration of harmonic color. The physical arrangement of scores had created conceptual connections that influenced compositional thinking. Candle wax that had dripped during evening composition sessions had hardened into sculptural forms that reflected the creative energy present during their formation. Wax patterns had captured the temporal essence of specific compositional moments, creating accidental artworks that commemorated breakthrough creative instances. These wax formations had become unconscious monuments to musical inspiration, preserving in physical form the energy of artistic achievement. Accidental physical traces of creative work had accumulated throughout the study, creating an archaeological record of artistic activity that preserved evidence of the creative process and forms that transcended musical notation. The fountain pen's nib had been worn into a unique shape by Benedetti's grip and writing pressure, creating distinctive line characteristics that influenced the visual appearance of musical manuscripts. The pen had developed writing qualities specifically adapted to Benedetti's compositional style, producing notation that reflected not just musical ideas, but the physical gestures through which those ideas had been transferred to paper. Acoustic reflection patterns in the study had created standing wave nodes at specific locations where certain frequencies were naturally amplified or suppressed. Benedetti had unconsciously arranged his furniture to optimize acoustic response for the types of music he composed most frequently, creating environmental conditions that supported his particular compositional approach while potentially inhibiting other musical styles. The metronome's mechanical precision had gradually been altered by years of use, its pendulum developing slight irregularities that created rhythmic characteristics unique to this particular device. These microscopic timing variations had influenced the rhythmic feel of compositions that depended on metronomic reference, creating musical timing that could never be exactly replicated using different timekeeping devices. Mechanical wear and compositional tools had created unique performance characteristics that influenced musical creation in ways that made each composer's working environment acoustically and physically irreplaceable. Sheet music storage systems had been organized to reflect associative relationships between compositions, with works sharing similar harmonic content stored in proximity to encourage cross-pollination of musical ideas during retrieval. The filing system had functioned as an external memory architecture that supported creative thinking by maintaining conceptual connections between related musical works. Dust accumulation patterns throughout the study had revealed which areas received most frequent use during compositional work, creating usage maps that showed the physical choreography of creative activity. Dust-free zones around the piano bench and composition desk marked the epicenters of artistic productivity, while accumulated dust in other areas indicated lesser-used regions of the creative environment. The environmental optimization for creative work required balancing human comfort, instrument stability, and acoustic quality through passive systems that supported artistic activity without creating mechanical distractions. Musical instrument cases had developed unique acoustic properties through years of storing specific instruments, their interior potting shaped by repeated contact with violin curves, their air spaces seasoned by the molecular outgassing of wood and varnish. The cases had become acoustic extensions of the instruments they protected, maintaining tonal memory that influenced instrument sound quality when cases were opened for compositional use. Window glass had accumulated microscopic scratches and surface variations that created unique light refraction patterns during different seasons and times of day. These optical effects had influenced the visual quality of light falling on manuscript paper during composition sessions, creating illumination characteristics that affected both legibility and aesthetic appeal of handwritten musical notation. The Persian rug's dye patterns had been created using traditional methods that involved natural pigments whose molecular structures absorbed and reflected specific light wavelengths. The rug's color characteristics had influenced the visual atmosphere of the study in ways that affected mood and creative output during different lighting conditions, creating psychological influences on compositional work. Traditional craftsmanship and decorative elements had created subtle environmental influences that affected creative work through psychological and aesthetic channels that operated below conscious awareness but influenced artistic output. Paper manufacturing for musical manuscripts had involved water sources whose mineral content influenced ink absorption and longevity characteristics. Different manuscripts had aging properties that reflected the geological characteristics of regions where their paper pulp had originated, creating connections between musical compositions and the geographical environments that had contributed to their physical preservation materials. The grandfather clock's pendulum swing had created air currents that influenced dust movement and acoustic reflectance patterns in the study. These micro-atmospheric effects had contributed to the environmental characteristics that made prolonged creative work comfortable and acoustically optimal, demonstrating how mechanical timekeeping devices participated in environmental optimization beyond their primary temporal functions. Musical tuning fork collections had been selected to represent mathematical frequency relationships that reflected Benedetti's theoretical interests and compositional preferences. Different tuning standards had been available for experimental purposes, allowing exploration of alternative pitch relationships that might suggest new harmonic possibilities for compositional development. Alternative tuning systems and experimental pitch relationships had expanded compositional possibilities beyond conventional harmonic practice, encouraging musical exploration that pushed boundaries of traditional tonal organization. The study's acoustic design had incorporated golden ratio proportions in room dimensions and furniture placement, creating mathematical relationships that produced optimal acoustic response for musical creation. These proportions had been based on architectural principles that connected physical space design to mathematical concepts that also governed musical composition, creating environmental harmony between space and artistic activity. Musical instrument binding glue in musical reference volumes had gradually released aromatic compounds that created distinctive olfactory characteristics associated with scholarly musical research. These scents had become unconsciously associated with theoretical study and compositional analysis, creating sensory triggers that supported focused intellectual work during composition sessions requiring theoretical problem solving. Window viewing angles had been calculated to provide visual access to garden areas whose seasonal changes offered natural rhythmic inspiration through the observation of growth cycles, flowering patterns, and deciduous transitions. The study had been positioned to harvest creative inspiration from natural processes that operate on temporal scales ranging from daily to seasonal, providing musical metaphors for compositional development. Natural viewing opportunities from the study provided access to temporal patterns in nature that offered metaphorical models for musical development, connecting compositional processes to biological and seasonal rhythms. The compositions desk's surface had been shaped by years of writing pressure that created microscopic topographical variations reflecting the physical gestures of dictation. The desk had developed unique tactile characteristics that provided unconscious feedback during writing, creating physical comfort that supported extended compositional work while preserving evidence of creative activity in its worn surface. Acoustic treatment materials in the study had been selected for their ability to absorb specific frequency ranges while reflecting others, creating spectral characteristics that enhance perception of musical details most relevant to compositional decision-making. The acoustic design had functioned as a frequency filter that optimized the study environment for creative listening rather than entertainment. Instrument maintenance tools had been arranged according to frequency of use and seasonal requirements, creating organizational systems that supported ongoing care of compositional instruments while maintaining immediate access to tools needed for emergency repairs during intensive creative periods. The maintenance organization reflected Benedetti's understanding of instrument care requirements. Instrument maintenance systems had been integrated into the study design to ensure continuous availability of optimal instrument performance during unpredictable creative periods when inspiration demanded immediate access to properly functioning musical tools. The study's lighting design had incorporated multiple illumination sources with different color temperatures and intensities to support various aspects of compositional work. Reading lights provided focused illumination for detailed notation work, while ambient lighting created atmospheric conditions suitable for creative contemplation and musical imagination. Manuscript storage systems had been designed to protect paper from light damage while maintaining easy access during composition sessions, requiring reference to previous works. Storage organization reflected both preservation requirements and creative workflow needs, balancing archival protection with artistic functionality. Air circulation patterns had been optimized through window and door placement that created natural ventilation, supporting extended creative work without mechanical systems that might generate acoustic interference with sensitive musical listening required during composition. The ventilation design had prioritized acoustic quality over environmental control convenience. Natural environmental systems had been integrated into study design to support creative work through passive approaches that avoided mechanical interference with acoustic conditions necessary for precise musical listening and notation. All these sophisticated environmental and instrumental relationships had evolved through years of creative work that gradually optimized every aspect of the study for maximum artistic productivity. The space had become a complex system where every component contributed to creative output through carefully developed relationships between tools, environment, and artistic process. The study had achieved the ultimate expression of creative environment design, a space where every element supported artistic work through relationships that had developed organically through years of compositional activity. Each object had found its optimal position and function through gradual refinement guided by creative necessity and artistic intuition. In the complete integration of the composer's study, artistic environment had evolved beyond mere tool collection into a complex creative organism, where every component participated in musical creation through relationships that transcended their individual functions. The silence of the completed study represented not emptiness, but fullness, the accumulated creative potential of every musical idea that had been conceived within its walls, every composition that had been notated, every artistic decision that had been preserved in manuscript form for future performance and enjoyment. And you experiencing this ultimate creative sanctuary through the collective consciousness of its components can rest in complete confidence that artistic inspiration continues to flow through spaces where serious creative work has been accomplished. The study maintains its creative vigil, ready to inspire new artistic work should hands ever again approach its keyboard. Sleep now, completely embraced by the perfected creative environment, where every component exists in service to artistic expression, where silence holds infinite musical potential, where creative inspiration flows like an eternal river through physical space designed for artistic achievement. The composer's study continues its artistic meditation as your consciousness dissolves into peaceful rest. Tomorrow's creative possibilities wait in the study's continued readiness, its accumulated wisdom available for whatever artistic discoveries may emerge through future engagement with the musical mysteries that surround sleeping and waking consciousness alike. Sweet dreams, safely held within the ultimate creative sanctuary, where inspiration and notation have achieved perfect harmony, where musical potential exists in eternal readiness, where the deepest secrets of artistic creation wait in patient silence for minds ready to receive their gifts of musical possibility.